Are you deaf, old man? I gave you an order. The voice was sharp, polished to a fine edge by years of command and entitlement. It cut through the crisp morning air on the parade ground, turning heads among the assembled families and dignitaries. The man it was directed at didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, a small, weathered island in a sea of pressed uniforms and gleaming shoes. He was perhaps 80 years old, dressed in a simple, dark jacket that had seen better decades and a pair of gray trousers. His shoulders, though stooped by age, held a certain squareness, a memory of strength. But it was his eyes that were most remarkable. They were a pale, clear blue, steady and calm as they rested on the source of the voice, Brigadier General Garrison. Garrison was the opposite of the old man in every conceivable way. He was tall, immaculate in his dress uniform, a constellation of ribbons and medals adorning his chest. He radiated an aura of absolute authority, the kind that expected and received immediate compliance. He was a man who saw the world in terms of regulations, appearances, and hierarchies. And this old man, standing alone in the front row VIP section, was a glaring violation of all three. This area is for distinguished guests and ranking officers, Garrison said, his voice low and laced with irritation. He took a step closer, intentionally invading the old man's personal space. You, sir, are neither. Now, for the last time, move back with the general public before I have you removed. The old man's gaze didn't waver. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. I was told to stand here, he said. His voice was quiet, raspy with disuse, but carried a strange weight. Garrison's jaw tightened. He prided himself on running a tight ship, and this public defiance was intolerable. The ceremony, a graduation for a new class of Rangers, was his showcase. He glanced around, seeing the curious stares. He needed to end this quickly. Told by whom? Garrison sneered, his lip curling slightly. Did a ghost from a past war whisper it in your ear? Look at you. He gestured dismissively at the old man's simple attire. This is a place of honor, for men who have earned their place. Not for civilians who wander in off the street. He pointed a polished finger at a small, tarnished pin on the old man's lapel. It was a simple silver bird, its details worn smooth by time. What's that supposed to be? Something you picked up at a surplus store to look important. The old man's hand drifted up to touch the pin, his gnarled fingers caressing the worn metal. It was given to me, he said, his voice still level, betraying no anger. A long time ago. The quiet dignity in the response only seemed to fuel Garrison's fury. It was like trying to dent granite with a fist. He was used to people snapping to attention, stammering apologies, or cowering. This serene indifference was a direct challenge to his authority. I'm done with this, Garrison snapped. He turned and caught the eye of two young military police officers standing nearby. Sergeants, escort this individual off the premises. He's trespassing. The two MPs, both barely out of their teens, exchanged a hesitant look. There was something about the old man's stillness that gave them pause. But an order from a general was an order. They moved forward, their boots making crisp sounds on the asphalt. Sir, you need to come with us, the first MP said, his voice respectful but firm. He reached out to take the old man's arm. The moment the young sergeant's fingers made contact with the thin fabric of the jacket, the world shifted for the old man. The warm Georgia sun vanished, replaced by the biting cold of a high-altitude night. The scent of cut grass and diesel exhaust was gone, overwhelmed by the metallic tang of rotor wash and damp jungle earth. The polite murmur of the crowd faded into the tense, crackling silence of a radio earpiece. He wasn't an old man on a parade ground anymore. He was 25 years old, codenamed Spectre, crouched in the open door of a specially modified, blacked-out helicopter hovering silently over a triple canopy jungle. A hand, firm and steady, squeezed his shoulder. It was his team leader, a man whose face he could never forget. The signal. Time to go. He remembered the weight of the gear, the cold certainty in his gut, the absolute focus required to drop into a place the world wasn't supposed to know existed, to retrieve a man the government had already written off as lost. He remembered the impossible odds, the whispered prayers, the controlled violence that followed. The memory was so vivid, so all-consuming, that for a fraction of a second, His pale blue eyes lost their placid calm and sharpened into something ancient and dangerous, the look of a predator who had spent a lifetime hunting in the dark. The young MP felt a tremor run through the old man's arm, a surge of coiled energy that was utterly at odds with his frail appearance. He instinctively pulled his hand back as if he'd touched a live wire. The old man blinked, and the parade ground snapped back into focus. He looked at the two young soldiers in front of him, their faces a mixture of duty and unease. He felt a pang of something akin to pity for them. They were just boys, following orders. He gave a slight nod, a silent signal of compliance. He would not make this harder for them. He turned to walk with them, his steps slow but steady, his dignity an invisible cloak around his thin frame. General Garrison watched with a smug sense of satisfaction. The problem was handled. Order was restored. He turned back toward the podium, ready to begin his speech. But then a new sound intruded, a low, rhythmic thumping that was rapidly growing louder. It wasn't the scheduled flyover of F-16s. This was different, deeper, more menacing. Heads began to turn, not toward the podium, but toward the sky. The thumping grew into a deafening roar as two shapes crested the tree line. They were unmistakable. AH-64 Apache Gunships. They weren't flying over. They were coming in, low and fast, their weapon pods and Hellfire missiles glinting in the sun. They were flying with an aggressive, ground-hugging posture that spoke not of ceremony, but of combat. Garrison's blood ran cold. This was not part of the program. No one flew into his airspace without his explicit authorization. He grabbed his aide's radio. "Control tower. Who the hell are these cowboys? I want them identified and ordered out of my airspace immediately." That is a direct order. The frantic voice on the other end was nearly drowned out by the noise. "Sir, they're not responding. They've declared emergency priority landing. Call sign is Nightfall 1. Before Garrison could process the name, the lead Apache did something that defied all protocol. It flared aggressively, its rotor wash tearing at the flags and banners, kicking up a storm of dust and debris across the pristine parade field. It settled onto the grass not 50 yards from the VIP section, a multi-ton beast of war sitting where meticulously manicured lawn had been moments before. The second gunship took up a protective hovering position overhead, its chain guns swiveling to cover the area. The crowd gasped. This was an unprecedented, shocking breach of military discipline. For a moment, everyone was frozen. Then the canopy of the lead Apache hissed open. A figure in a flight suit and helmet climbed out, moving with an athletic grace. He pulled off his helmet, revealing the silver eagles of a full colonel on his collar. His face was set like stone, his eyes scanning the crowd with focused intensity. He ignored the apoplectic General Garrison, who was now stalking towards the helicopter, his face purple with rage. The colonel's eyes swept past the rows of stunned officers and families, searching, and then they found him. They locked onto the small figure of the old man, who had stopped his slow walk with the MPs to watch the unbelievable scene unfold. The colonel's entire demeanor changed. The hard-edged combat pilot vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Respect. Reverence. He began walking, then jogging, directly toward the old man, his boots sinking into the soft turf. He moved with a purpose that eclipsed everything else on the field. "Colonel, what is the meaning of this?" Garrison bellowed, finally reaching the pilot. "You are in violation of a dozen regulations. You have endangered this ceremony. I will have you court-martialed for this." The colonel didn't even break stride. He brushed past Garrison as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes fixed on his target. He came to a halt 3 feet in front of the old man and the two bewildered MPs. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his hand in the sharpest, most perfect salute General Garrison had ever witnessed. It was a gesture of such profound, unadulterated respect that it silenced the entire field. "Spectre," the colonel said, his voice thick with emotion, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It's an honor to see you again, sir." The old man, Samuel, looked at the colonel. A flicker of recognition, of a shared and secret past, passed between them. He gave a slow, tired nod. "It's been a long time, son. You're flying a much bigger bird these days." Garrison, utterly ignored and incandescent with fury, finally exploded. "What is going on here? Who is this man? And what is this nonsense call sign? He turned on the colonel. I am the commanding general of this post, and I demand an explanation now. The colonel slowly lowered his salute, but he never took his eyes off Samuel. He finally turned his head to face Garrison, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. General, the colonel began, his voice dangerously calm. Your rank gives you command of this base. It does not, however, give you the right to disrespect a living legend. You asked who this man is. You should be asking what he is. He took a step closer to Garrison, forcing the general to look at the unassuming old man again. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Samuel Croft, retired. But no one ever called him that. To the handful of people in the world whose security clearance is high enough to even know his name, he is known by one word, Spectre. A few of the older sergeant majors in the crowd, men whose memories stretched back to the quiet wars fought in shadow, stiffened at the name. It was a myth, a ghost story told in hushed tones in classified briefing rooms. The colonel continued, his voice rising, a prosecutor laying out an irrefutable case. You see that little silver pin you mocked? That isn't from a surplus store. That is the Archangel Award. It has been given out exactly 7 times in the history of the United States Special Operations Command. It is awarded for acts of valor so secret they can never be publicly acknowledged. It is the highest honor a ghost can receive. He gestured back to his Apache. You see this gunship, General? The tactics we use, the night-flying capabilities, the very doctrine of modern special operations aviation? He didn't just learn it. He wrote it. He wrote it in the jungles of Southeast Asia, the deserts of the Middle East, and a dozen other godforsaken places that don't appear on any map. He flew experimental aircraft into impossible situations to pull men out of hell when everyone else had left them for dead. Garrison's face had gone from purple to a pasty white. His mouth hung slightly open. The MPs who had been holding Samuel's arms looked as if they might be sick. The reason he was standing right here, the colonel's voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried across the silent field, is because the Secretary of Defense himself personally called me last night. He told me that Spectre would be attending his grandson's Ranger graduation and that I was to ensure he had the best seat in the house. That spot wasn't just a VIP seat, General. It was a designated place of honor for the ceremony's most distinguished guest. Your aide was supposed to have been briefed. The aide, standing behind Garrison, looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. He'd seen the email, but the name Samuel Croft meant nothing to him, and he dismissed it as clerical error, failing to pass it up the chain to the general. The colonel wasn't finished. He looked directly at Garrison, his eyes burning with a cold fire. You asked me why I landed my aircraft against your orders. The call sign for our unit is Nightfall. It was given to us by our founder 30 years ago. We are the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. And our founding father, our first pilot, the man who created us from nothing but courage and a handful of black-painted helicopters, is standing right here. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We have a standing order, General. It comes from the very top of SOCOM. It has been in place for 30 years. If Spectre is ever in distress, if he ever needs anything, no matter where we are in the world, we drop everything and we come. The phrase emergency priority isn't just a request. For him, it's an absolute. The silence that followed was absolute. The entire parade ground, Rangers, families, officers, and the arrogant general, was staring at the quiet old man who had endured the humiliation with such grace. A hero, a legend, an architect of the very freedom they were celebrating, standing right there in front of them, and they had been blind to it. General Garrison felt the world tilting under his feet. The ribbons on his chest felt like cheap tin. The star on his shoulder felt heavy as lead. He looked at Samuel Croft, at Spectre, and for the first time, he truly saw him. He saw the lifetime of sacrifice etched into the lines on his face, the immense weight of secrets carried behind those clear blue eyes. He had mistaken humility for weakness and silence for irrelevance. The shame was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. He took a stumbling step forward, his own rigid posture crumbling. Sir, he stammered, the word foreign and difficult in his mouth. Sir, I had no idea. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. My behavior was inexcusable. Samuel looked at the humbled general. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction. Only a deep, abiding weariness and a profound well of grace. He raised one of his gnarled hands and gently placed it on Garrison's uniformed arm, right over his rank. "A uniform shows your station, son," Samuel said, his voice soft but clear. "It tells people where you stand, but it doesn't tell them what you've walked through. Remember that. Respect the person, not the rank. That's the only command that truly matters." The words were a gentle correction, not a rebuke, but they hit Garrison harder than any official reprimand ever could. He nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. The colonel stepped forward. "Sir, we're prepared to escort you wherever you need to go." Samuel smiled faintly. "I'm right where I need to be. I just came to see my grandson graduate." He looked out at the formation of young Rangers, standing frozen at attention, having witnessed the entire drama. He found the face of a young man, his own clear blue eyes staring back at him, filled with a mixture of awe and pride. The master of ceremonies, after a frantic, whispered conversation with Garrison's aide, finally found his voice. He stepped to the microphone, his voice trembling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have the distinct and unexpected honor of being in the presence of a true American hero. Please join me in recognizing Chief Warrant Officer 5 Samuel Croft." A single person began to clap, then another. Then the entire field erupted in a thunderous, sustained ovation. The young Rangers broke their formation, turning as one to face Samuel, their salutes as sharp and reverent as the colonel's. It wasn't an order. It was a spontaneous flood of pure respect. Samuel stood there, bathed in the applause he had never sought, his quiet dignity a lesson more powerful than any speech. The two Apaches remained, one on the ground and one in the air, silent, watchful guardians for their creator. They were a stark, formidable reminder that the most dangerous men are often the ones you see coming. But the greatest heroes are often the ones you never see at all. What we witnessed that day wasn't just about a mistaken identity. It was a powerful lesson in humility and the nature of true strength. It's a reminder that the world is full of quiet heroes, men and women who carry the weight of incredible history in the stoop of their shoulders and the calmness of their eyes. They don't ask for recognition, but they deserve our deepest respect. So the next time you see an old veteran, don't just see an old man. See the history he carries and the sacrifices he made. If this story reminded you of the quiet strength that lives all around us, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like it, and share it with someone who appreciates the unsung heroes who walk among us every day.